Stop before you watch this. Give me 1 second. Because what you're about to see on screen right now is the only way to understand why the story I'm about to tell you still hasn't been solved. April 2026, Canada's Northwest Territories, the deepest, most remote corner of the mountains. A hunter named Kevin Paul raises his camera and records what's standing in front of him. A huge, furry, upright silhouette. For a brief second, it turns its head sharply toward him. And when you watch it in slow motion, you can actually see it blink. Researchers who have examined this footage say it could be one of the most valuable Sasquatch recordings of the year. But the thing that's really going to lock your eyes to the screen is the second clip. Same region, same forested area. A towering humanoid figure sprinting through the trees at a speed no human could match. Keep that in mind, because these two clips are directly connected to what I'm about to tell you. One of the darkest, most suppressed mysteries in North America. There's a national park in Canada's Northwest Territories called Nahanni, and for over a century this place has been pulling people in and never giving them back. Gold seekers, hunters, ordinary travellers. So many people have died or disappeared here that since 1908 alone, at least 44 people have died or never been found again in this valley. Generations ago, locals gave this place a name, and that name still stands, unchanged, the Valley of the Headless Men. Now stop here for a second, because what I'm about to tell you doesn't take place in the 1800s. It isn't just some dark legend, it happened in 2005. Satellite phones existed, GPS existed, search and rescue teams were working with modern equipment, and none of it made a difference. June 12th, 2005, a man named David Horse enters Nahanni Valley together with his closest friend, Frederick Hardesty. Horse is 60 years old, has spent decades in the mountains, knows this wilderness like the back of his hand. Everyone who knew him says the same thing: experienced, cautious, never someone who panicked. Hardesty is the same. They're not city tourists, not weekend campers at all. Two men who had already managed to survive in this wilderness many times before. The purpose of the trip wasn't only to hunt, they were also going to help repair their friend Rod Gunderson's cabin. That cabin sat in a completely isolated spot overlooking the South Nahanni River, with the steep rocky cliffs rising up behind it. The nearest help was more than 100 kilometres away, but the cabin was solid. It had a stove, beds, food, a rifle and ammunition, built so sturdily that even a half-ton grizzly bear couldn't tear those walls down. Now think about that for a second. Two experienced mountain men, a cabin equipped with everything you'd need, loaded rifles within arm's reach. These were not people caught unprepared. Quite the opposite. They had everything necessary to survive. And that's exactly the detail that makes what happened so inexplicable. On the 12th, Rod meets the two men at the cabin, walks them through the repair plan, then heads back to town for supplies, leaving Horse and Hardesty behind. 4 days later, on the morning of June 16th, when he returns, both of them are gone. The repairs haven't even started. His first thought is that they might have gone hunting. Then he looks at the ground. A rifle is lying there, eggshells scattered everywhere, and when he looks closer, he freezes on the spot. The walls are riddled with bullet holes, big and small. Splinters of wood torn loose, scattered into every corner of the room. Something happened here, and it was something violent. Rod reports it immediately. An officer named Parker is sent to the scene. When he arrives, The chimney is still smoking. The fire in the stove hasn't fully died out. The food is still inside. Even the rifles weren't taken. Nothing is missing. Whatever it was that drove these two men out that door, they left in a hurry, and not very long before Rod walked in. Even a trained, experienced officer can't find a single reasonable explanation in this cabin. There's no sign of a struggle, no sign of theft, plenty of food and shelter just sitting there. So neither the officer nor anyone who knew these men can even guess why they left. 2 days later, on June 18th, a full-scale search begins. Everyone around Fort Simpson joins in. Teams search this wilderness, stretching for kilometres in every direction by boat and by helicopter. Terrain so dense that a person could be lying just 6 metres off the trail and still not be seen. 11 days later, on June 27th, David Horse's body is found 3.7 kilometres from the cabin inside a dense thicket. Exactly 11 days after that, on July 8th, Frederick Hardesty's body is pulled from the North Nahanni River, 20 kilometres downstream from the cabin. Now pay attention, because this is exactly where things start to get strange. The initial reports say both bodies were largely intact, but Horse had burn marks on his hands and arms that couldn't be explained in any way. No one can say what caused them. The official ruling is that Horse died of hypothermia and Hardesty died by drowning. The case is closed. No murder, no criminal element, file closed. Not a single additional detail is released to the public. But the families don't stop there. Horse's stepbrother Joseph goes to the cabin himself months after the investigation officially ends, and he finds the exact same scene the officers described. Eggshells still on the floor, boards shattered by bullet holes, every round in the rifle fired, not a single one left. When Hardesty's family examines his body, they notice something else. A large, jagged tear running from top to bottom of his shirt. Beyond that, no other detail about the true condition of either body is ever shared with the public. The case is officially closed as a tragic accident. But the families never accept that answer. How can two men in the same weekend die kilometres apart, one in a river, one in the forest? It's genuinely disturbing. There's no closure, says Horse's sister. The families repeatedly request that the case be reopened. Every time, they're denied. Officials insist the investigation was thorough and complete. Now stop for a second and do this math yourself, because this is exactly the part that keeps people up at night. 2 experienced mountain men in a cabin full of food, weapons and shelter, found dead in 2 completely different locations within the same tiny window of time. One nearly 4 kilometres from the cabin, inside dense forest. The other 20 kilometres downstream, in a river. Whatever it was that drove them out that door, it had to be something they feared far more than the wilderness they'd survived in for years. More than a bear, more than the cold, more than the isolation. Years after the case went cold, someone claiming to have been part of the search team leaves a comment online. According to this person, the true state of Horse's body was completely hidden from the public. The claim is that his head wasn't there, that his body was covered in fractures from head to toe, arms broken, legs broken, that no one on the search team knew what had done it, and that afterward no one wanted to say a single word about it. I have to be honest with you here. This detail has never been officially confirmed. Take it for what it is. An unverified claim from an anonymous commenter. But there's a reason this claim spread so fast, because you already know what this valley is known for. Other viewers also point to something that ties everything together. The area where these two men died has carried the name Headless Valley for over 100 years. And that name isn't some internet made up nickname. It's tied to a documented pattern of disappearances and deaths going back generations. According to most people, a large part of these are linked to something that people in the region swear is enormous and not human. In one of the comments, someone shared a personal experience that gave everyone who read it chills. Last summer, they went up the mountain alone to pick mushrooms. This is a massive stretch of wilderness with only one way in and one way out. Not a single vehicle passed on that road the entire day. Just before sunset, they heard a sound coming from deep in the valley. Deep, enormous, unlike any animal they'd ever heard before. They said they'd lived in that region their whole life, hiked that mountain at least twice a week for years, and had never heard anything like it. Not a bear, not a deer, something else entirely. Now let's talk a bit about the land itself, because this is one of the most overlooked parts of this story. Nahanni Valley covers more than 30,000 square kilometres, roughly the size of Belgium. More than 90% of it is still completely untouched wilderness, dense forest, steep rising peaks, a maze of rivers and lakes almost no one has ever seen. It became a national park reserve in 1976. There are no campgrounds, no roads, no visitor facilities of any kind. The only way in is by chartered plane or by boat, fighting the current for hours. Even pilots who've flown this park for more than 40 years admit there are still areas they've never seen. Now imagine trying to search for two missing men in this terrain. This isn't a park with trails and watchtowers. It's a place where even the people who know it best still don't fully know what's inside it. The most dangerous section of the park is that massive, raw, untouched area, almost entirely unmarked by human presence, Headless Valley itself. And for centuries, the few indigenous families who tried to settle in this region have also vanished without a trace. Local oral history speaks of massive beings living in these mountains, one some elders called mountain demons. Today, many researchers believe these old stories describe a regional variant of Sasquatch, one far bigger and far more aggressive than anything reported anywhere else in North America. Witnesses in the Northwest Territories consistently describe a creature noticeably larger, more powerfully built than the ones reported in places like Washington or Oregon, exactly like the one hunter Kevin Paul filmed at the start of this video. It's estimated at over 9 feet tall. And here's the part most people don't notice. Horse and Hardesty were not the first people to disappear this exact way in this exact stretch of forest. Not even close. Since the early 1900s, there's a whole list of eerily similar headless body cases coming out of the same valley. In 1906, two brothers named MacLeod go into the valley chasing rumours of a massive gold vein. Before they left, they told their friends they'd found gold pure enough to set them up for life. They're never heard from again. 2 years later, in 1908, an expedition finds two bodies tied to a tree deep in the valley. They're confirmed to be the MacLeod brothers, both men decapitated. Their heads are never found. This single discovery is what gives the place its name today. Word spreads down the river to the trading posts, and from that point on, this river basin stops being just a frontier region. It becomes Headless Valley, as people said back then, the place where the map ends and the monsters begin. And the deaths don't end with the McLeod brothers. In 1989, 6 miners team up and enter the valley with gold panning equipment and weapons, hoping to strike it rich the way the McLeod brothers once claimed to have. All 6 vanish on the way in. Years later, a hunter passing through the area comes across a small, abandoned campsite and finds human bones scattered around it. The skeletons are still gripping their rifles tightly, and every single one is missing its head. Officials rule that the 6 men froze to death, and that animals dragged off the skulls afterward. The case barely makes the news. Almost no one outside that region ever hears about it. And this pattern isn't limited to just the McLeod case. Similar deaths keep surfacing across the decades. Explorers, hunters, trappers, all dying in exactly the same way. Bones from this forest are still turning up to this day. Now let's take everything we have and think about what might really have happened to Horse and Hardesty. One theory says something attacked the cabin that night. Something so large that both men grabbed their rifles and fired straight into the walls to scare it off. When they ran out of ammunition, only one option was left: run. Maybe they got separated in the dark. 0 visibility, no time to think. Hardesty ends up in the river. Remember, the river ran right past the front of the cabin. Horse makes it deeper into the forest, then goes down. I know it sounds extreme, but there's a case in the United States that lines up with this almost exactly, and it's one of the most famous encounters in Bigfoot history. At Ape Canyon near Mount St. Helens, 5 miners are besieged overnight in their cabin by a group of massive ape-like creatures. Just like Horse and Hardesty, these miners also grab their rifles and fire straight into the walls to drive the creatures back. It doesn't work. One of the creatures reportedly gets its arm through a gap in the door, and the miners try to force it back out. The siege lasts the entire night. When the creatures finally retreat into the trees at dawn, only then can the 5 men escape. One of them later says that if they'd had even 1 fewer man, or 1 fewer rifle, none of them would have made it out alive. Those miners came down the mountain. Horse and Hardesty never did. And that's exactly the question this leaves us with. When the evidence on the ground, the bullet holes, every round fired, 2 men running from a well-stocked shelter into a deadly river valley in the middle of the night, doesn't match any official explanation. What do you do? The file gets closed, the families never get their answers, and the valley keeps its name. What happened out there still stands as a living warning to anyone who thinks they can walk into that land uninvited. The disappearances, the bodies found without heads, the unexplained sounds echoing through the trees after dark. Maybe none of this is just legend. Maybe this is the wilderness answering back to a world that keeps pushing forward into places it was never meant to go. Somewhere in the deepest, least touched corners of this earth, there may still be things that exist outside everything we think we understand. Now, it's your turn. Imagine what Rod Gunderson saw that morning. The bullet holes, the untouched food, the rifles just sitting there. If you'd been there, would you have run into that dark forest in the middle of the night, or stayed inside and taken your chances? Write your answer below. I read every single one, and I'll cover the one that catches my attention most in the next video. If this story kept you hooked to the end, we cover exactly these kinds of cases on this channel every week. So subscribe now, turn on the notification bell so the next case doesn't pass you by. If you're new here, welcome, you'll fit right in. And before you go, hit the like button too, because it helps this channel way more than you'd think.